guys, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about why I love this camera, the Panasonic Lumix G9, and really just sharing some of my thoughts on this camera after using it for about 10 months now. Going on about a year now, I've been using this camera for my landscape photography, and I just want to talk about that a bit. So that's what today's video is about. So this will be the second video I'm making about a Lumix camera that I've owned. Basically sharing my thoughts on the camera and why I enjoy them so much and like using them so much. The G9, which is something I really loved about the G85 as well, as what I'm filming this video with. The ergonomics and build of these cameras to me are just amazing, and I think that's maybe something like people don't talk about as much as you think they would about cameras, since, you know, they are like made to hold in your hands, and using your hands, it's like any camera should feel good to hold, and it should be comfortable to hold. And in the last video I made about the G85, I talked about how much I liked how that camera felt to just hold in your hand, the ergonomics and the button placement. I feel like the G9 is just even the next step better than the G85. It's a bigger body for sure. I mean, if you compare them side by side, the G9 is definitely a larger camera body. But it's honestly how they made the grip on the G9 is just, in my opinion, even better, more grippier, if that's a word, grippier, and more comfortable to hold than the G85. And the button placement is very just amazing on this camera, which I'm going to talk about here right now. So as far as the button layout and the ergonomics of that part of the camera, I really love the dial on here. You can use to switch through menus and stuff. That's just fantastic. The G85 does not have that. And then also, which is just one of my favorite aspects of this camera, is the fact that it has this joystick back here, which you can use for going through menus and such, but also I use it for using back button focus, to put the focus point where I want it, and then I press this button here, the AF/AE lock, to focus on whatever I have, you know, the little pinpoint on with the joystick. Another little button feature I like on this camera is this little switch up here on the front. You can switch back and forth, you can probably see it there. I have that set to turn off on and off bracketing, so I do use bracketing sometimes with this camera if I'm shooting in very, you know, high contrast scenes. I just need better dynamic range. And sometimes I won't even use, you know, I won't even blend the images. I just like to have a couple options to choose from. I actually have this set to when I turn it on, the camera, what it'll do is it'll take 3 separate images at 3 separate exposures, and, you know, then I can go through and I can choose which one I want to use. Now with this camera you can choose multiple different ways for the bracketing to function. So I use exposure bracketing on this switch, but you can also use focus bracketing as well, which I've never used a focus bracketing on this, but it does have that option. I do really like the exposure bracketing sometimes, though. I normally go with the 3 separate exposures I'll do, so what the switch is set to, but I think you can do 5 or 7 if you want to as well. So I just felt like 3 was enough for me. As far as like buttons, this camera just has plenty of buttons that you can program to do whatever you want them to do. Like I was talking about that switch on the front that I use for the exposure bracketing. There's also 2 buttons here next to where the lens goes that you can use to basically set to whatever you want them to do. And really all the buttons you can set them to do whatever you want. They're all programmable to just set up how you want it to be set up that'll work for you best. So I do have a few of these set to certain things, but the ones that I really do use the most would be this little switch on the front for the exposure bracketing. Of course, you have the dial back here, which is for setting your shutter speed, and your aperture is the one up here. The only buttons on this camera that I found kind of like, maybe it took me a bit to get used to, because I just feel like a bit weird to always find them sometimes when you're shooting, is the video record button right here. The thing is, I don't really shoot much video with this camera. It's pretty much like basically just my photography camera, so I don't use that button all that much, but I have shot some B-roll with this camera for some of my vlogs, and yeah, I always have to kind of remember that that button is just way up here. You gotta find that, and just remember where the ISO is. You know, the ISO button is right up there, just behind the aperture knob. So, but other than that, it's not really that big of a complaint, but it's just something that I had to kind of get used to. One more thing that I love about the placement of buttons and things on this camera is the fact that they put this screen up here on the top. You can view what all your settings are set to. It's kind of nice sometimes if you don't want to have to look at the screen and you're using the viewfinder, you can just look at the top of the camera and you'll see, you know, your shutter speed and your ISO and your aperture and all of that stuff you can see. As far as some of the specs on this camera, honestly, I'm not like super into that stuff. I do know like the basic things with this, so I'll go over some of that stuff very quickly for you. It does have a 20.4 megapixel sensor, which is, you know, up from the 16 megapixel sensor that the G85 has, as well as being weather sealed and having built-in image stabilization. Both of those things I absolutely love. The image stabilization is fantastic in these cameras. The Lumix cameras just have amazing image stabilization. And the weather sealing is great because, you know, when I'm out shooting landscapes and everything, I don't want to be worried about, you know, if I get rained on, I don't want to be worried about my camera. It's kind of like not being able to handle a little bit of moisture. And I have used these cameras in rain and snow before. I've never had an issue and gotten them kind of wet, and they're always totally fine. Doesn't have an issue with that whatsoever. One feature in it that I do like that I have used this was the 80 megapixel resolution mode, where basically, you know, you have to set up on a tripod and keep the camera still. But this has a 20 megapixel sensor. It will basically move the sensor around and take 4 different shots, I imagine, and stitch them together automatically in the camera, and it will give you an 80 megapixel file, which I have used, I only think one time, when I was hiking at Blue Lakes in Colorado last summer. Down by Ouray, Colorado, I was hiking a trail called Blue Lakes, and I did use the 80 megapixel mode to capture an 80 megapixel image, which I'll probably just put in the screen so you can see that image. It also shoots in 4K 60 frames per second if you do shoot video with this. I've shot a little bit of video with this, which I have shot in 4K 60, but I don't shoot a lot of video with this camera. I mostly use it for my photography, and I still use my G85 for my filming, but it does also have a 6K video mode as well, which I've literally never used because I don't use this for video. So I can't really speak too much on that, other than the fact that it does have the features and you can use it. The image stabilization to me is probably one of the most important features that these cameras have, because it's just incredibly good, to the point where you can do like pretty slow shutter speeds with these cameras because the image stabilization is so good. I have multiple examples of photos I've taken where I've done 1-second exposures handheld with this camera, and also the Lumix G85 as well. The only thing, you just have to make sure you have a really steady hand, because if you do move a bit, then it's going to get some blur in there and you'll have to just reshoot the photo, which I had to do before. But generally, as long as you keep your hand really steady with this, it can definitely do 1-second exposures handheld, and you're not really going to lose much detail or have much blur in the image as long as you keep the camera steady. Especially for me, as someone who prefers to mostly shoot my landscape photography handheld, I only like to take out a tripod if I have to. So when you have a camera that has that good of image stabilization, you actually just take out the tripod way less. I've heard in the past some people say that mirrorless cameras tend to get not very great battery life, but the battery life on this camera is absolutely fantastic. Like, most time I can go out and shoot for an entire day, or maybe I'll even do a day and do an overnight camping backpacking trip out there, shooting, do an overnight trip, shoot day, and then the next morning, and one battery will last the entire time, no problem. It won't even go dead. So I can only work on like one battery on this camera for like 1 or 2 days of like shooting quite a bit. I would say probably like 2 days I could use this camera on just one battery charge, and yeah, it's not going to go dead. So the battery life is really fantastic on this camera. About a year ago, I did my video talking about my Lumix G85 and why I liked that camera so much, and I shared all my thoughts on it, basically the same as how I'm doing this video on the G9. And my one and only real complaint about the G85 was the fact that the autofocus just, it was okay, but it just wasn't quite as good as I wanted it to be. It does actually work for my needs pretty well, so that's why I still have the camera and I haven't gotten rid of it. But the G9 definitely has improved autofocus over the G85, which was kind of a big thing for me. Again, I don't use this much for video much, but I imagine for like vlogging, it would actually probably do pretty well with the autofocus, because it's just a lot quicker than G85. And I know that recently they came out with a new, or they're coming out with a new firmware update for the G9, and I guess they're improving the autofocus even more. So I'm looking forward to getting that firmware update as soon as it comes out, and seeing how the autofocus improves even more. Now, the biggest thing with a camera like this is that if you're going to purchase something like this, if you're taking it seriously to purchase something like this, like they are, you know, they definitely are a bit more pricey than some of the lower end Lumix cameras. Because when I had the G85, that was a camera I only paid about $800 for. Now I think you can get it for about $700, and that included the 12 to 60 millimeter Lumix zoom lens. Now the G9 I think normally runs about $1,200 US, and that's just the body without a lens or anything. So it's a lot pricier than the G85 or something else, one of the lower end Lumix cameras, which are still fantastic cameras. I did end up getting this camera on sale, and I think I got it for $200 off. So I paid $1,000 for it instead of $1,200, so that was a really great deal to get $200 off the camera. Sometimes they do run sales on these quite often, actually, where they're like $200 cheaper, so you could look out for something like that to get it for a bit cheaper. But yeah, it's definitely more of a financial commitment to pick up one of these compared to one of the cheaper models like the G85 or the G7 or the GX85 or something like that. If you're comparing micro four thirds sensors like this with full frame, the lenses for these cameras, the micro four thirds are a lot cheaper and a lot smaller and weigh a lot less. So although I spent more on the body, it seems like you can still get lenses for these for a very affordable price, and they're all very good lenses. So I talked about a few of my lenses that I have in the past and a couple of videos I made recently. I'm currently using the Lumix Leica 8-18mm lens to film this video with on my G85, which is definitely a pricey lens. It runs about like $900 to $1,000. Lenses like this, the 12-60mm Lumix, these are actually reasonably priced. I ended up getting this used in excellent condition for about $200. I also have this 45-150mm telephoto lens, which brand new, these things only cost like $250. I got it used for less than $100, and it was in, again, excellent condition. I use this thing all the time, and it's just, honestly, I can't believe how good of a lens this is for how affordable it is. So when you pair, you know, a body like this with some cheaper but really great lenses like these, you actually still have a pretty affordable kit that's just not going to cost you that much. When looking into even doing some full frame cameras, the bodies weren't that much more than the G9, some of the entry level full frames, but the lenses just seemed to cost way more than the lenses for the Micro Four Thirds. So that was actually a big deciding factor for me, was sticking with Micro Four Thirds and getting the Lumix G9 instead of upgrading to a full frame setup. So that is really me sharing why I love my Panasonic Lumix G9. I could probably go into way more detail in this camera if I wanted to, but really I don't want this video to be like 30 minutes long. So I kind of want to go over some of the, you know, base things that I like about this camera, why I think it's a fantastic landscape photography camera. Honestly, you could probably use for other photography as well if you wanted to, but landscape photography is what I basically do. And although I pretty much only talked about the photography side of this, because that's what I mostly use it for, I do feel like this would also be a very capable video camera to use as well, especially if you're looking to have 4K 60 FPS. Anyways, thank you for watching. If you do have any more questions about the Lumix G9, feel free to leave me a comment down below and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. I like hearing from my viewers and hearing what you guys think. Maybe we can have a bit of a conversation about this camera down below. And if you did enjoy this video, feel free to subscribe to my channel down below to see more videos about landscape photography and, you know, me using this, the Lumix G9, on some landscape photography. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.